Hi, and welcome to my podcast for parents. My name is Ann Maxwell, and I'm inviting you to a space where you get to be who you are, not only as a parent, but as the amazing being you actually are. Hi, everyone. Today, I would like to talk about dementia. And I get that it may seem like an odd topic to talk about, but I can't tell you how many parents I've spoken to whose own parents are aging and aging specifically in this particular way. I have a lot of experience with this. My mom had profound dementia, and she lived with me and my then husband for the last 2 years of her life. And so I want to tell you about my experience with her and just open up some different avenues and different lenses through which to view all of this. So, what is dementia? It's an impairment of memory, and it's also described as a persistent loss of intellectual functioning. And then sometimes it's described as having personality changes that accompany that. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, is really more behavioral than anything else. Yes, there's memory loss. Yes, there's impairment in thinking, but there's also the presence of behaviors that are really, really difficult to deal with. And my mom didn't have those. So she had just regular old dementia. First of all, my mom was well educated. She was bright. Her mind was active. She loved to read. She loved history. She was a writer, she was a translator, bilingual in French and English, loved to travel, like all that kind of stuff, really intellectually stimulated. She went to an incredible college and one of the Seven Sisters. Back in the day when women didn't necessarily go to college as often as they do now. And then she got an advanced degree. So she was intellectually very, very smart and really with it. And in terms of how she presented her intellectual capacity, sometimes it was with an edge. And I don't know of anybody on the planet that could pack more into fewer words and get right to the point than my mom. And it's a skill that I actually have and that I I attribute to her. I really did learn it from her. As she grew older, the first part of her memory that started to slip is the short-term memory. There's short-term, midterm, and long-term memory. And I had a conversation with a friend over the weekend who was upset because her mom tells her the same story over and over and over again. And that's almost sort of down the road a little bit from the first short-term memory that I was aware of with my mom, which is she would forget things like what she had for breakfast when she had just eaten breakfast. She was living with, I mean, she and my stepdad were married, and he lived with her and really took care of her for the last years of his life. But he died 2 years before she did, and it was at that point that she came to live with us. The thing that was so unnerving about her is because she had such incredible intellectual skills, to see her not be able to remember things and to look confused. And then emotionally, it was upsetting to her. She would be embarrassed. And she she would say to me sometimes, darling, I think I'm losing my marbles, which is a way to for her to describe what was going on inside her head. My stepdad would take a nap after lunch, and nobody wanted my mom to drive. And so she would wait until he was sleeping and then snag the keys or the clicker thing and take the car. And then one of my brothers and my stepdad would spend time trying to track her down in the neighborhood. She lived in Maryland while this was going on, and I'm in Colorado. Then when he died, she came to live with my then husband and me. And thank God for him. He was a blessing. He and my mom adored each other, and he really helped make the last 2 years of her life living with us possible. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So she also was medically fragile. Her blood pressure was out of control. Sometimes it would spike up and sometimes it would drop down. And so we there was a medical component to her care. But one of the things that I noticed about her memory loss is that it was gradual over time, like that, the sort of forgetting what she had just done or forgetting conversations that she had really occurred over a period of years looking back on it. And then the deterioration intensified. It speeded up, it seems like, and it opened up possibilities that hadn't been before because she was for some reason she was less guarded. It talks about personality change, and that may be one way to describe it. I choose to think that she became more of who she actually is or who she actually was. That sort of crispness and sharp, she had a really sharp tongue sometimes, was just a thing that she did to defend herself or protect herself or survive, if you will. And one of the things that the dementia did was that it softened the edges, and she became much more at peace, and she was really sweet. I have a couple of girlfriends that were such a help to me back then. They would come up and we would have girls' night because my then husband was working at the time, and we would have girls' night, and she would sit at the table and she'd be so happy to be surrounded by us. So when I think about somebody with dementia, I think about my mom in particular, and then body, heart, mind, and spirit. So her body clearly was deteriorating. She had that blood pressure thing, and then she had this loss of memory and sort of impaired functioning. Her heart was just big and generous and kind, like full heart. Her mind was severely impaired. And I want to talk more about the progression of memory loss. And then her spirit, that may be her without the edges, actually being more of who she was. So with that being said, she loved hanging out with me and with my girlfriends and with all of my friends. I would take her to parties and like that kind of stuff. But as time wore on, her cognitive functioning deteriorated to the point where she required 24 so that Brad and I could then work. And she would do things like, we had a grill that we cooked out on a lot, and I would bring her whatever the meat was that we put on the grill, and then corn on the cob, which she loved, and which is plentiful in Colorado in August. And she'd look at both of us with this childlike joy, and her whole face and body would light up. And she'd say, "Why, it's been years since I've had corn on the cob," when in fact it was like 2 nights ago, like that kind of stuff. And I know that when she lived with another family member, people in that family didn't understand the deterioration, and they would laugh at her and make fun of her and correct her and be really angry at her for repeating herself. What's the matter with you? Like, why didn't you remember? Which I think is a tendency when you see your mom, who you've known forever, all of a sudden function in this weird way, and you think is purely behavioral, and you think that she has some kind of control over it, when in fact for my mom, she didn't. She had absolutely no control over it at all. The other thing that happened with it during this period of memory loss is that she opened up and told me stories about her childhood, about her experiences during and following World War II. She ended up being an interpreter for one of the generals. He was a British general, and who was towards the end of the war and after the war, Dwight Eisenhower's chief of staff. It's so interesting as she couldn't remember that she what she'd had for breakfast as she got up from the table and turned away, as that memory was erased. It seemed like the long-term memories were flooding her, and we would have long conversations, which was really me just listening to her as she told me stories about her childhood and stories about growing up and stories about her early adulthood before she and my dad were married. And it was fascinating. And one of the regrets that I have is that I didn't record them. So heads up to all of you out there if you have that kind of connection with whoever your parent is. But as that need, that sharpness to defend and protect herself dissipated, it's like it went inside. And these stories that she told me were stories that she never would have told me growing up, and even, even early adulthood. For me, they were protected and they were deep within her. And she was then able to access them. And it was incredible. It really was. Over time, her short-term memory loss became mid-term memory loss. And then before she died, she was with us for a couple of years. And before she died, she didn't know anybody except for me, Brad, and my sister was familiar to her. We had different moms, same dad. And I know that my mom recognized her and recognized her voice. I'm not sure that she remembered her name. And that was right before she ended up leaving the planet. Giving you a sense about what my journey was like with my mom for the last 2 years of her life, and then for some of the years before. But the thing that was so difficult for me to wrap my head around was the change in capacity, and yet the roles, she she still viewed me in her 90s and me in my 50s at that point as her child, and yet she was completely and utterly incapable of taking care of herself, and towards the end incapable of dressing and undressing herself and getting herself ready for bed. And I used to think that life was the word lifeline, that you start and you go along a line and you end. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think it's a circle, full circle. She became as incapable of doing the things that are required for an adult ability to function daily. She became as incapable of doing those things for herself as little kids are and as babies are. And she required other people to do that. And yet, she never forgot that I was her child and she was my mom. And she and I we were really good friends. We really liked each other. We used to travel together. There were years when I was in boarding school, when I was in high school, I was in France and she was in the United States, and we wrote to each other every day. We were really connected. And yet the change in circumstances required me to step up and be the grown up in the room, and to be able to call the shots that needed to be called so that she could receive the care that she required. And I think that's a huge challenge for any child, to suddenly be the adult in the face of their parent whose cognitive and physical abilities are diminishing. I just want to say that there are many ways to look at that. There's what you have to do, and then there's how you do it. And I knew that I needed to be the one to take charge and to make really major decisions in addition to all the minor ones. The how I chose to do it was huge. And even though her cognitive abilities were rapidly failing, she was like an radio tower, just and she picked up so much energetically. She was so tuned into the environment. So, for example, caregiver would show up in the morning and I would be getting ready for work, and she would be downstairs and eating breakfast and stuff like that. And I was the only one who could give her meds, and or my Brad could too, but the caregivers couldn't. if I came downstairs late and in a rush, I can't tell you how long it would take her to chew a mouthful of scrambled egg. Like that energy of that we have all the time with kids, with people like, come on, chop, chop, I got to get out of here. Boom, 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 boom. She would just shut down with that. Like any force, any expectation, any results driven exchange would shut her down. And so, what I would do is at the top of the stairs, I would take a deep breath and I would still my body and get my heartbeat down and walk downstairs and say hi. And I would be able to give her her meds and be out of there in a fraction of the time than if I went down rushed and wanting her to do something that she didn't actually want to do. And it wasn't that she didn't want to take her meds, it's just that she didn't want to be rushed like that. It's like, no. One of the things that I also learned about her is if I asked her if she wanted to do something and she said no, one of the gifts of dementia is that with a short-term memory loss, she would forget it. And so I could ask her again 5 or 10 minutes later in a different way, appeal to her differently, and she'd be all up for it. Do you want to, oh, I need to go to the store and get blah, blah, blah. Do you want to come? No. And then 10 minutes later, I go to her and say, hey, Dory, who is our dog, and I are going to go to the store, and it's a beautiful day. And I was thinking it might be nice for you to get outside. You want to come? And she'd go, oh, yes, like that. Another thing I want to say and emphasize again is as the deterioration went on, especially during the early years, she knew that her capacities were failing and she was embarrassed, hugely embarrassed. And one of the things that I was able to do was to not comment on the memory loss. And when she said, darling, I think I'm losing my marbles, I would say to her, well, that may be true, but you've got lots and lots of marbles left, which are awesome marbles. So, and then she would laugh or smile or whatever, sort of acknowledging what she was saying without making it a big deal, just it's almost like she was so present and then she would sort of rear out thinking that she shouldn't be where she was, that she should be something else. And one of the kindest things that I was able to do for her was to acknowledge where she was without making her wrong or making her feel like she had to be or do something that she couldn't at that point. Another thing I know about her is that she looked a lot better than she actually was. She she had a poker face and she was awesome. She was funny, she was a flirt. She flirted with everybody, men, women, kids of all ages, pets of all kinds. She's like a magnet, like a person, people critter magnet. And I think that was a sort of a skill set she developed early on that really helped her present herself in a way that was less indicative of how deep the deterioration had gone. Like a lot of people didn't really know it until they spent time with her. The only other thing I want to say is there was one point where her circadian rhythm got turned completely upside down with caregivers who were happy to have her take a nap in the afternoon and didn't care about the fact that she was up all night. And at one point, Brad and I were both sick, and she wasn't sleeping at night, and she was required us to be awake and alert at night and was sleeping during the day. And so we had hospice services for her. And at the suggestion of the hospice guy, we had her go to a facility for, I don't know, like a week or something, just to change her sleep so that it could get turned back to sleeping at night and being awake, except for a brief nap in the afternoon. She was so mad. Like, I can't even begin to tell you how angry she was at being there. And the hospice chaplain, whose name was Jonathan, said, don't go. Like, you need to, don't go there. Don't visit her. Take this time, heal your body, like, do some stuff. You and Brad need a date night, like all this stuff. And I would still go periodically and check on her. So freaking mad. And Jonathan said, you need to have a conversation with her and let her know that she needs to sleep at night and be awake in the day. And I said, yeah, but she has no memory. She's never going to remember it. Like how can that have an impact that means anything? And he said, what you do is you have a conversation of the heart. And he said, you tell her from your heart what needs to happen in order for her to stay with you. And I did on the way home. And she never was awake at night again after that. And her circadian rhythm really was turned back around correctly so that we could take care of her. So it really isn't personal. And they are where they are. I guess the only other thing is to be kind to yourselves. I am grateful for you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like, you can connect with me below in the comments section. And if you'd like more information about me, please go to my website at www.annmaxwelllcsw.com.